The agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Hear them roar. Europe's austerity foes call for strikes across the continent. Will anyone listen? It's time to talk. General strikes are scheduled across southern Europe this week, but trade unions want them to spread all the way to Germany, a test of solidarity that may go nowhere. In Syria, a sign of unity, opposition groups say that they're ready to form a government once President Assad is history. But inside the country, tens of thousands are rushing to get out. Who is treating the wounded and the sick who can't flee? Today, a doctor reports on the medical misery in Syria. And all business and no play. That's pretty much sums up what to expect when the leaders of Russia and Germany meet later this week. Now, these two have never been what you'd call the best of friends, but now diplomatic daggers are flying between Berlin and Moscow. Today, we'll try to dissect the dysfunctions of this relationship. Well, I've invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. Now, my first guest says that German Chancellor Angela Merkel has the political muscle to get tough with Vladimir Putin about the troubling state of human rights and democracy in Russia. I'm happy to welcome to the show Lucien Kim. He spent years as a correspondent in Moscow. And Lucien, you were also part of Putin's press pool for a while. Tell me, you say Germany has the leverage to get tough with Russia. Is it going to use that leverage?
That's the big question right now as Merkel travels to Moscow. Germany is a big trade partner and therefore, I would argue, has a lot of more political clout than it believes it has.
All right, we're going to talk about that political clout in just a moment. My second guest just returned from northern Syria. He is one of the few physicians from outside who has been able to treat the sick and wounded in the country. A very brave doctor, I have to say. I'm happy to welcome to the show Tancred Stüber. He is with Doctors Without Borders, the unit here in Germany. Tancred, thanks for coming on the show today. You say the medical situation in Syria is horrendous right now.
Yeah, it's the biggest problem we see is surgical wounds. People are wounded by the civil war, and we see people so heavily wounded that they have to be treated right on the spot. Otherwise, they're going to die. They don't make it even to the neighboring countries.
Yeah, I mean, terrible situation. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment as well. And my next guest is helping to coordinate what could be one of the biggest days of protest that we've ever seen in Europe. I'm happy to welcome to the show Gabriele Bischoff. She is with the Confederation of German Trade Unions, known here in Germany as the DGB. Gabriele, thanks for coming on the show today. What in the world is going to make German workers, let's say, go out on the street and protest, show solidarity with Southern Europeans when the economy here is doing so well?
First of all, solidarity is a core element of our joint trade union movement in the world. And secondly, these cuts in wages, in pensions, in social and workers' rights, we see them as attacks on the European social model as in general, and therefore it is very important that we all together try to save our European social model, because in the long and medium term it will affect us all.
All right, we're going to talk about that social model and the timeline we're working with in just a moment. Speaking of time, put this in your calendar, Wednesday, November 14th. Southern Europe will come to a halt and erupt into one huge general strike. Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Now, trade unions are hoping that the protests against Europe's most severe budget cutbacks in memory will find supporters right here in Northern Europe as well. Some are saying November 14th will go down in history as the beginning of the end of austerity.
Throughout Southern Europe, demonstrators are out in force. They're protesting European governments' attempts to save their way out of the debt crisis. Many ordinary Europeans say that they're carrying the brunt of the harsh austerity measures. Cutbacks aren't popular at the best of times, but they seem especially brutal in view of skyrocketing unemployment throughout the region. In Spain, a full quarter of the population is jobless, and youth unemployment has shot up over 50%. But it's not just the unions and young people venting their displeasure on the streets. In Portugal, even the police and military have demonstrated against austerity measures. Now, European trade unions have called for a European Day of Action and Solidarity on November 14th. But what is it supposed to accomplish?
That's a big question people are asking here in Germany. Gabriele, let me ask you, what do Germany's trade unions have to gain by participating in this big call to action for the 14th of November?
In the European Trade Union Confederation in October, we all decided together to have this Action and Solidarity Day because we know that it's urgent to have a change of course in Europe because austerity is not working. It's a complete economic failure and it has severe social consequences in these countries.
And what are you calling for then? What is supposed to take the place of austerity?
We need a growth and jobs program, we need investment, and we need solutions that help these countries to get their economy again in order. And therefore, it is important to invest in people and not only saving banks.
What do you think is going to happen? I mean, it's this week, it's this Wednesday. Look into your crystal ball. What are we going to see across Europe?
I think on one hand, we will have general strikes in Spain and in Portugal. We have a couple of hours strike in Italy and also in Greece. The Greek already had last week a general strike. And we will have a lot of solidarity actions in 24 countries in Europe with more than 41 trade union organizations involved in it. And it will be important to put on the table the problem of the social consequences of the austerity measures and on the same hand show that we are united to have an appeal to the European institutions, to the governments to stop these policies that are not working.
But Gabriele, aren't you rather late with this? I mean, the talk of austerity, the push for austerity, it's been going on for over 2 years now. I mean, shouldn't the unions have been doing this 2 years ago?
We did. We started 2009 with more than 1 million people on the streets of Berlin, of Madrid and Brussels and Prague in the same week. We had a couple of action days over the years, but now I think it's a good time because you can see much more the consequences of this austerity politics, and you can see, and even the IMF had to acknowledge it, that it's not working.
And there are some critics who would say that the trade unions are part of the problem that we're dealing with right now. If we look at what's going on in Greece, a lot of the generous pensions that are being paid to civil servants who retire at the age of 55, those pensions are guaranteed by contracts that were negotiated between the government and trade unions. Aren't trade unions, I mean, that's what you represent, aren't you actually part of the reason so many people are unhappy now?
I think it's an interesting debate because the crisis started because of a financial crisis. It became an economic crisis. And it's not the workers in Greece or in Spain that caused the crisis. And also it's a myth. And it's very interesting that in Germany we have a lot of myth about the lazy southerners or that everyone in Greece earns a lot of money without working a lot, having a lot more holidays or stuff, which in reality isn't true. If you look at the pension age...
The reality is, Gabriele, the trade unions in Germany for the past 10 or 15 years have worked with the government to make the labor market more flexible. They have gotten praise from around the world for the labor market here being able to adjust more to globalization. Now, there are a lot of people right here in Germany who say that Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, that they have not done their homework and that they have to loosen up their labor markets just like the Germans did 10 years ago.
Yeah, but...
I mean, are you guys trying to block that?
One point is the German trade unions didn't support the Hartz reforms or the 2010 agenda of the German government,
here in Germany.
But we were opposed it, but we were not successful in the long run. We have to admit that. But now we can already see the social consequences of these reforms also in Germany, because we have growing inequality in Germany. We have an increase in precarious work. So it's not like we are an island of the happy few in Europe, and the rest of Europe suffers.
Do you think the politicians here in Germany then are selling us a lie? Because the message is Germany's economy is made of Teflon. It has survived the Eurozone crisis. What we're doing is the right thing.
I mean, we had initiatives of trade unions, employers, and government together to come through the crisis. We used the flexibilization of the working time, for example, with the working time accounts we have. But it's not a flexibilization that only served the employers, but also the workers, because we had joint solutions in this field. And what we criticize is an oversimplification, because they are using these reforms to sell a further deregulation of the European labor market, but also of workers and trade union rights.
Okay.
And that's what's not happening here in Germany.
Let me pull in Lucien and Tancred on this. I mean, obviously, you're also here in Germany. You also work here in Germany. You hear that the German model is something that needs to be exported to Southern Europe. We hear that a lot. What's your take on that? I mean, are the trade unions blocking something that needs to be done in Southern Europe?
Well, what I can say about specifically Greece is that the health system in Greece is under such a big dilemma at the moment. Because of the high unemployment, people cannot pay their bills anymore. They cannot even pay their health insurance. We see even the suicide rates going up because chronic psychiatric patients cannot pay their medication anymore. What people are suffering medically in Greece is a big trouble. Of course, we see all the countries who are in trouble in the Southern Europe also have to face the migrant issue from Northern Africa, and they have a lot of burden to carry, and they don't get a lot of support from their sort of northern neighbors, if you say so. I think there is a good reason to really help out those. At least the health system from our point of view.
Lisa, what do you think? Are the workers in Southern Europe, are they being asked to carry the burden of mistakes that have been made by the politicians?
Well, I think what Gabriela said was interesting. I mean, it started as a financial and as a banking crisis. And it's hard to blame workers necessarily for the mistakes of others. And so obviously they're going to be carrying. Maybe they were encouraged to take credits. I mean, this was a problem. I think even in Germany now, consumer credit is skyrocketing, and so they're bearing the brunt. And unfortunately, it seems like that's always how it happens. I mean, the little guy gets it first.
And also, I mean, we're talking about the little guy here. The little guy doesn't have as much representation as he used to, does he, Gabriela? I mean, the trade unions have lost influence in Europe. I mean, even here in Germany, if we look at trade union membership over the last 15 years, it has been going down steadily. Is this crisis a blessing for the trade unions?
No, this crisis is a blessing for no one, maybe except some speculators or some people. But for the trade unions in these countries, it's very hard because they are under a lot of pressure. And they are losing members also because the members, they can't pay their health insurance, they can't pay their trade union fees. But I think it is very important, and in this crisis there is a chance to reunite and also to be visible and seen as one of the rare forces that fight for a change of course in Europe. We are all pro-European organizations. We don't turn into nationalistic organizations.
But are German workers pro-European, though, Gabriela? That's what I wonder. I mean, unemployment in Germany is low. It's at the lowest point it's been since reunification took place. And when people outside of Germany look at Germany's economy, it's usually with envy. So how can you expect workers here in Germany to go out on the street and complain about anything?
On one hand, as I said, these consequences in the medium run will affect us all. I mean, Germany profited enormous from the euro. And on the other hand, our success relies a lot on export. So if the export to the other European countries is shrinking, because, I mean, if you are in such a crisis, you will not import the goods we are producing. You can see that our economy is very much connected. But what I have to admit too, yes, also in Germany they're raising doubts about Europe and will it really save the European social model, or sort of will it be only an economic zone, and does the economy in the long run will be stabilized again or not?
Do you think, I mean, I remember reading something that you had said that, you know, today we have protests in Spain, tomorrow maybe France, and then the day after that in Germany. Do you think there is an economic storm headed for Germany that a lot of people are just not willing to see?
I think that at the moment people are not really seeing what's coming up, and we can really see at the moment. I mean, and it's not only southern countries, that's not true, it's Ireland too. I mean, remember the Irish Celtic Tiger?
Yeah.
It was the model for us all. They are in problems too. And therefore, I think you have to see the whole picture, and you can see already that a couple of countries are coming into problems, very strong European countries,
but do you,
and Germany will be affected too.
Okay,
that's for sure.
So I mean, that's what you think Germany is headed for tough economic times?
It will come in much tougher economic times.
All right,
yes.
all right. We need to move on to a country that is dealing with something a lot more dramatic and traumatic, and that is Syria. There is some progress to report on attempts to create what could become a functioning government when and if President Assad's hold on power crumbles. The Syrian National Coalition for Opposition and Revolutionary Forces formed last weekend in Qatar. The Arab League and the United States have given it full recognition. Damascus says that it is more proof of foreign intervention. Well, none of this changes the misery that has become the norm inside Syria, and there are no signs that the military and the rebels are ready to stop fighting.
Reports coming out of Syria paint a grim picture. The violence is escalating, and so are the casualties. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad denies that the country is in the midst of a civil war. He blames the violence on terrorists, backed by foreign powers. Now many of the different factions fighting government forces have united. The violence has crossed international borders into Turkey, Jordan, and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. And on the ground in Syria, the situation is dire. Between 2,000 and 3,000 Syrians are fleeing the country each day. Most are seeking refuge in neighboring Turkey and Jordan. Over 36,000 people have died as a result of the fighting since March 2011.
Tagut, I mean, you are one of those rare specimens right now, someone who's actually been able to get inside Syria and see what's going on and then come out and report about it. Tell us what you experienced as a physician there.
Well, I have to say, after 10 years of experience with Doctors Without Borders, this was quite a new experience for me, to be in an actual war situation that is still not sort of decreasing but increasing by the day. We had bombing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Actually, we were happy when we only sort of heard the tanks bombing and not the helicopters or the air strikes, because they were even more dangerous for what we did. We have now 4 clinics inside Syria where we treat basically sort of surgical wounds, people who...
And you're calling them clinics, but let's tell folks what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a clinic, a building where doctors are working as we know normally. I mean, these are what, tents or someone's apartment?
Right. This is a very specific situation because we cannot have a full-fledged open hospital. They need to be very well camouflaged because
you're not supposed to be there.
No, you're not supposed to be there. These are all very discreet things. They are makeshift things in private houses, in caves, in tents, somewhere where it's not visible, where it's not sort of possible, or at least little risk to be attacked by bombs. But the thing is, the reason why we went inside Syria is because the people are, if they are wounded, if they're shot at, they have no time to lose to make it over to the other side because they simply bleed to death. So they need immediate surgical care. And if that takes more than an hour, their hopes are lost to survive it all.
I mean, what were you seeing or hearing there? I mean, are we talking about large numbers of people who are bleeding to death, who are dying from wounds that normally would be treatable?
Sure. I've heard hundreds of stories of Syrians trying to get, for example, to Turkey, but they virtually bleeded to death on someone's back or in the back of the car. And once they make it to the border sometimes or quite often is closed, so they then don't make it over to the other side. And that's why the needs in Syria are so high. Even Syrian doctors try to get out of the country because of the insecurity. So there's a lot of new and increasing numbers of sick patients, but a decreasing number of medical staff.
Okay, that's right. I mean, the doctors are trying to save their lives as well. Who were you treating? I mean, I have to ask this. The people coming in with wounds, are they rebel fighters, or did you also have some soldiers from the military coming in? I mean, you're a doctor. You can't turn them away either, can you?
Right. And specifically as a humanitarian organization, being neutral, independent, impartial, we treat everyone who comes to us. What we see is about sort of half of the casualties we see are civilians and the other half are fighters.
It's rebels. Are you talking about rebels, or are you talking about soldiers with the military?
Well, it's hard actually to distinguish because they call themselves fighters, yeah. And for us, we don't care. We don't care if they are sort of from which side they are coming from. At the moment, and of course,
I just want to press you on this. Did you get the feeling that they were telling you the truth? Did you ever get the feeling that you had some of Assad's regime soldiers coming in telling you they were fighters because they needed medical attention?
In the area where I was, that was a mainly opposition-controlled area.
Okay.
So there it was more fighters from the opposition side. And that sort of was a dilemma for us because we were always trying to work on both sides of a conflict. Yeah? And in Syria, it is very difficult to have that. Yeah? So the majority of wounded people I've seen were actually from the opposition, but the most severe cases I've seen were civilians. Yeah? An old lady whose house was bombed and she fell off and had an open fracture wound. Another one who got a shot at the abdomen, and we don't know whether she survived on her way. We stabilized her, but she had to have further treatment in a neighboring country. Probably she died on the way. It's really dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, these are horrific stories. Let me bring in Lucien and Gabriele. Gabriele, when you hear this, why are Europeans not saying loudly something has to be done, or we need to be there helping the Syrians? I mean, when we hear these stories here, is this the impetus that we need to make our governments react?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on one hand, Europeans reacted to Syria, but I think it is very important to show how people are affected, and also what can Europe do and what can people do to apply to stop this situation.
But there's actually very little. There's very little that can be done, right, Lucien? I mean, we've got Doctors Without Borders there, but that's about it, right?
Unfortunately, I think you're right, because I'm thinking back at the Yugoslav conflict, and there was similar bloodletting much closer to the heart of Europe, and it took a long time and maybe some pushing from the U.S. before there was actually any kind of military intervention. So what we're talking about in Syria, it's physically and culturally much farther away, and I think for many Europeans. It's just it's a faraway conflict.
And also, there is this level of cynicism too, right? I mean, we hear these terrible stories from doctors who are there, but we think they're going to fight anyway. There's nothing we can do to stop the fighting. And that appears to actually be the case now, that efforts outside of Syria have done little, if anything, to stop the bloodshed that, like our good doctor here is trying to treat. I mean, it's hard for the cynicism level not to be so high. Talk to me, if you would, doctor, about the level of cynicism that you saw in these makeshift clinics.
Well, for me, it's completely unacceptable that in 2012 we have a situation on this planet, and it's not that far. The Middle East is really sort of just next to Europe, that we tolerate that. And the UN Security Council is not able to convince all its partners to do common action. So this, for me, it's completely unacceptable. And the EU and the European politicians are not, from what I can see, are not doing enough to get anything done there.
And are doctors pointing the fingers at China and Russia? I mean, Lucien here, he's our Russian man on the show today. I mean, doesn't the Kremlin partly carry responsibility for all of this tragedy that's going on right now?
Well, you mentioned cynicism, and I think, there's cynicism on all sides, but I think the Russian position that, well, we are neutral and we're not supporting the Assad regime, I think this is sort of the most cynical reaction.
And that's also a lie. They're selling arms to the Assad
They have
regime.
sold arms, and they have fulfilled previously signed contracts with the Assad regime. So this is sort of the height of cynicism. And so I don't disagree with anything that you said. It's but simply these are the... realpolitik, I guess.
Yeah, it's realpolitik. It's exactly what the situation is. Tancred, what about hope in the form of this unity coalition that formed over the weekend now? I mean, I know Doctors Without Borders, I know you guys don't like to talk politics, but this looks like a shimmer of hope. If Assad does fall, that there is this group ready to move in right now. Is that something that you hope will happen? Is that something that the people you were treating in northern Syria, were they talking about hoping to see a new government move in?
I mean, clearly, when you're on the ground, this is the most burning question. When is this ending? So I'll ask this question to almost everyone I see and who could speak. And interestingly, when I went there, I thought, well, I have to hurry up, because otherwise, once I get there, the conflict is over and I'm not needed anymore. That was one of the biggest realizations I had for myself, that this conflict is not ending soon. People say, well, they don't expect this to end in a couple of weeks or even months. They still believe it's going to be for years, because the conflict is so imbalanced inside Syria. But also people say, well, if the conflict would stop today, it would take at least 5 years for Syria to rebuild. If it goes on a little longer, it will take about 25 years to be rebuilt. So the people are extremely pessimistic, but also I've never seen people so determined to say, we are not accepting to go back to this old sort of regime country. We won't have change, and we sacrifice our life for that. So that's what makes me quite pessimistic, that this conflict gets even hotter and more brutal.
I mean, you're a lucky man in the fact that you were able to go there and help these people and get out with your life. Are you planning to go back to Syria?
Well, at the moment, I, with all my responsibilities here in my job and others, I can't. I would love to, because the people we have met, it's heartbreaking how warm-hearted they were, how they were caring for us, how they were feeding us every day, even so they had very little to give away. So it's really something we should take more care of, and that's why I believe it's not far. And these people are smart, intelligent people. They love their country. They love their lives. They're not fighting because they're all suicidal. No, not at all.
Yeah.
So they all desperately hope that this conflict ends soon, but there's no hope for them because they don't see any changes in the situation.
Yeah, I'm afraid we'll be talking about this here on Agenda for a long time to come. But Tancred, we appreciate you coming in and certainly admire your bravery and going into Syria to help everyone. And if you go back, we want you to stay safe. All right, we're going to move on to something slightly different, but it does touch on Russia. German Chancellor Angela Merkel travels to Russia this week to meet with President Vladimir Putin, and she will not be delivering a bouquet of compliments. Parliament has ordered her to talk tough with him about human rights abuses. Lawmakers here in Berlin have even gone so far to endorse a report that basically blames Putin for Russia's recent crackdown on dissent. All you have to do is think of Pussy Riot. Well, Putin and Merkel don't really like each other that much. That's what insiders say. Their body language certainly confirms that. But the economic ties are huge, big enough to force a strategic smile or two.
Now an important platform for German-Russian exchange in a wide variety of fields, the Petersberg Dialogue was initiated in 2001 by then German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Every year, leaders from the two countries meet up for a discussion forum aimed at promoting peace and cooperation. But lately, the relationship has been a little rockier than usual. Some German politicians have criticized Russia's heavy hand in issues involving free speech, like the sentencing of members of the punk rock band Pussy Riot. They were handed down jail terms after staging an anti-Putin performance in Moscow's cathedral. And the first of 17 people arrested during a protest on the eve of Putin's inauguration last May has now also been given 4.5 years in jail. How much will issues like these impact the German-Russian relationship?
All right, Lucian, I'm going to pull that cynic card out again. Does Moscow really listen or care what Berlin has to say about what's going on inside Russia?
I do think they have to care, and I've been thinking about this.
Why do they have to care? They've got the natural resources. They've got the natural gas. Aren't they holding they're holding the better cards, aren't they?
Well, they're at least acting like it. The German foreign minister had an editorial earlier this week in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung where he was arguing that Russia is committed to, or Putin is committed to, a European path. I don't think so. Now they're pretending like they can go a Eurasian path and orient themselves more towards Asia. I don't think that's possible. They really depend on Germany. They really depend on Europe. And they do listen, even though they put up this front that they don't. I would argue that Putin, several years ago in 2008, he could have easily returned for a third term. He had the domestic support. It would have been no problem to change the constitution. But because of external reasons, he decided to let Medvedev fill in for 4 years.
Okay, yeah, but that was something that, reminiscent of what's going on in China. They agreed, Medvedev, you do a term for me, and when your term's over, I'll run again, and I'll get elected, and that's exactly what happened. Can Angela Merkel, when she goes there later this week, can she afford to get tougher when she talks with Putin?
Of course she can afford to. I think they have a much franker relationship between themselves than appears in front of when they appear before the TV cameras. The trade volume between Germany and Russia last year reached a record 75 billion euros. That's a lot of money. Anything Merkel says, Putin listens to and has to listen to.
So at the end of the day, it's about economics.
Of course.
Okay, but see, this is. I'm trying to square this circle here. Can Merkel go into Russia and use Germany's economic power to force democratic change in Russia?
Well, that's of course the question. She can say what she wants. The German parliament can issue resolutions. Is that getting through to Putin? Is that going to change behavior? And I am quite convinced that it will not actually change behavior, but that doesn't mean that The German government and European governments and Western governments shouldn't vocalize their position.
Okay. I mean, and they're going to do that. I mean, we've seen that in Parliament, where Parliament basically condemning what's going on, basically blaming Putin for what's going on. But I think people looking at the situation from the outside are wondering, can anything change? Because I guess the biggest partner Russia has is Germany when it comes to Europe. And if Germany cannot affect real change inside, then who can? Are we going to have to, will it have to be Obama now that he's got a second term? I mean, is there anything from outside that can change the insides of Russia?
Well, this is the perennial question. I mean, Putin would want Russians to believe that that's all that the West wants. The West wants to affect change, internal change. It's also a question that you have to ask yourself. Should the West be affecting change? It can support certain movements and certain developments, but of course, the only people that can affect change in Russia are the Russian people themselves. This is not the responsibility of foreign governments.
But are they being held hostage now? I mean, is Putin dismantling the democratic progress that has been made in the last 20 years? I mean, is he replacing civil society with thugs and more police officers to watch over and control things?
But what we've seen with the last 4 years with Medvedev were sort of an interlude, and Medvedev was a very convenient partner for the West. He talked the talk, and he was a pleasant enough person to deal with. Putin's return, since Putin's return when he was inaugurated in May, has been a crackdown. And yes, it's been a distinct regression as far as any kind of democratic improvements. So the trend is rather disturbing, but Putin is convinced that the West is out to get him, and this I trace back to his KGB days, and the criticism from the West will only help confirm that to him.
Let me pull our doctor in and our trade union specialist in here. Does Germany have a moral obligation to use its economic might to affect democratic change in Russia? Gabrielle,
I mean, on one hand, although Europe is in deep problems, it cannot ignore what is happening in the other countries. It's the same with Syria or with Russia. But I think it's very important to just have not an economistic view on the world and to connect human rights and trade union rights together also with economic development. And therefore for us, for example, it is important to strengthen democracy in these countries. It's true, I mean, what's happening in Russia has to be influenced by the Russian people themselves. But I think it is important also to raise these issues, also knowing that the economic relationship between Germany and Russia are very strong. And very important.
These issues can be raised, but I'm just wondering, and let me ask the doctor here, do you think that would happen? Do you think the leader of the German government is going to threaten to cut certain types of economic contracts if things don't improve in Russia? I mean, aren't we being very naive to think that Angela Merkel would do that?
Well, I can't look inside her or Putin's heart. What concerns me or us as doctors is that the medical situation in the country is extremely tough. From the outside, the Russian Federation wants to play or draw a picture of everything is fine, we are doing well. But if you only look at one disease, and that's tuberculosis in Russia, in the Federation, that's extremely, extremely alarming. We have, in Chechnya alone, we have thousands of patients under TB treatment, and the world doesn't care. Russia even doesn't care. And there needs to be much more transparency and much more admittance. Yes, we have a problem.
Let's pick up on the health issue because we're running out of time, Lucy. And there are rumors about Putin's health. He hasn't been seen in public lately. Is Mr. Macho leader of Russia, is he sick?
There are a lot of rumors, and the fact that there are rumors and nobody really knows is in itself disturbing. It's reminiscent of the Soviet period where people were speculating what was going on with the various heads of the Politburo. So we don't know. It'll be interesting how he appears with Merkel. I know he wanted a very big meeting with her, and it's been reduced. So it'll be interesting to see how his public appearance.
And do you think, if he is sick, do you think that there is some type of planning in the background already for some type of power change, a la China?
Well, Russia is much more of a pyramid. He's at the very top, but there is a lot of fighting going on under the carpet, and this is already coming to light with all sorts of corruption scandals.
Yeah, like I said, I think this is another topic, too, we're going to be talking about on the show a lot more. Thank you, all three of you, for coming on the show today. That is going to round out the agenda for this hour. Don't forget, you can always watch the show again online. You can go to our website. You see the address. And don't be shy. Tell us what you think about the show. Our inbox is always open at agenda.english@dw.de. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Thanks for stopping by. Join me next time when I set the agenda.